The One Who Stayed, Tashumbe, TJ, Holdridge dedication for my son, Jaden. You are the reason I learned to stay. You are the reason cycles ended instead of continuing. Every page of this book exists because you exist. This story is not about who I was. It is about who you made me become. You are my legacy, my lineage, my universe. I love you. Part 1. The First Watch, Born of Bronze and Silence. The city woke slowly, as if reluctant to greet the day. Stone streets, still cool from the night, held the memory of yesterday's heat. Smoke rose from hearths in thin grey ribbons, carrying the scent of oil, ash, and bread not yet risen. Vendors moved quietly, laying out wares beneath patched awnings. Hands practiced enough to work without conversation. Children ran ahead of their mothers, bare feet slapping stone, laughter flashing bright and brief before being swallowed by the walls. Above it all, the guardian stood watch. He had been awake since before dawn, not from discipline, but from instinct. His body knew when night loosened its grip, knew when the balance between dark and light shifted just enough to require attention. He did not resent the early hours. They belonged to him. The world revealed itself more honestly before voices rose and intentions learned to hide. From the wall, the city looked peaceful. That was how it always looked before something went wrong. He rested his forearm against the stone, feeling the cold seep through leather and bronze. The wall was older than any living man, rebuilt and repaired so many times its original shape was forgotten. It did not matter. Walls were not meant to be perfect. They were meant to hold. Below him, the gates creaked open to admit the morning traders. Guards exchanged muted greetings, spears resting tip down, relaxed but never careless. The guardian watched their spacing, the angles of their shoulders, the way one man favored his right leg just enough to be a liability if pressed hard. He made a mental note, not to punish, to adjust. Strength was not correction. It was anticipation. A shout rose from the training yard, young men sparring, wooden blades cracking together. Someone laughed too loudly. Someone cursed when they slipped on loose gravel. The guardian allowed himself the faintest softening of breath. Life continued. That, more than silence, was what demanded protection. He had grown into the role the way stone grows smooth, slowly, through pressure. No one remembered the first time he climbed the wall as a boy, only that it felt inevitable in hindsight. He had always lingered at edges, always paused at thresholds. While others ran toward noise, he listened for what followed it. The elders noticed. They said little. The trainers noticed too. They corrected him less than the others, not because he needed it less, but because he learned differently. He remembered mistakes in his bones. Once corrected, he did not repeat them. Bronze came early. It was not ceremonial armor, not polished for parades or praise. It was shaped by hands that understood death, dented and reforged where others had failed. When it was set across his shoulders for the first time, the weight did not thrill him the way it did the others. Armor, he learned quickly, was not for bravery. It was for mistakes. Days passed in drills that burned muscle into obedience, shield work until his arms trembled, footwork until balance replaced thought. Hours of standing still atop the wall taught him the language of wind and shadow, how danger announced itself not with sound, but with absence. Silence became his ally. In silence, he could feel the city breathing beneath him. In silence, he could tell when something did not belong. He did not seek command. He did not argue orders. He stood where he was placed, and over time, others adjusted around him, without being told. When patrols shifted, it was usually his suggestion that held. When routes changed, it was his reasoning that made sense later. He did not fight to be seen. He fought to hold. Fatherhood did not arrive with ceremony. It arrived with warmth and weight and a sudden narrowing of the world. The first time he held the child, the city fell away. The walls, the watch, the constant outward focus, all of it collapsed inward to a single truth resting in his arms. The boy's fingers curled around his thumb with unthinking trust, and something older than steel shifted inside his chest. Not fear, responsibility, the kind that settles, the kind that refuses to leave. He did not become gentler. He became closer. When the boy slept, the guardian sat nearby with his armor removed, cloak folded beneath him. He listened to the steady rhythm of breath and placed his palm lightly on the child's back, not to restrain, not to protect against movement, but to be there. He did not speak vows aloud. He did not need to. The city changed for him after that, not in its routines, but in its weight. The walls felt nearer. The horizon felt closer. Every shout, every distant echo, every unfamiliar sound carried a sharper edge. Peace, he understood now, was not an absence of threat. It was a balance that required constant tending. The boy followed him everywhere the walls allowed, sat quietly at the edge of training yards, asked questions that were simple but heavy. Why do you stand there so long? To see. What are you looking for? Things that don't belong. The boy considered this, then nodded, as if it made perfect sense. At night, the guardian told him stories, not of conquest, but of endurance, of walls that held, of men who noticed danger early and prevented it from ever having a name. The boy listened without interrupting. Trust like that was terrifying. He believed sincerely in a dangerous idea, that vigilance from a distance was protection, that if he stood far enough ahead of danger, nothing could slip past him to reach what he loved. That sacrifice meant positioning himself between threat and life, no matter the cost. It was an honorable belief. It was also incomplete. The city tested it slowly at first. A scout returning late, a merchant caravan arriving light, a patrol reporting quiet where there should have been noise. Nothing conclusive, nothing alarming enough to demand action. But the guardian felt the shift. He adjusted patrols without orders, changed routes based on instinct, moved men where they would be needed, not where tradition placed them. Others followed because it worked. On the night before everything broke, the sky hung low and red with dust. The air felt thick, as though the city were holding something back. The guardian knelt before his son, hands firm on small shoulders. There may be noise tonight, he said. Men may run. People may shout. The boy frowned, trying to understand fear through a mind that had not yet learned it. If that happens, the guardian continued steady, you go to the inner room. You stay with the women. You do not step outside, no matter what you hear. The boy hesitated. Will you be here? He asked. The guardian held his gaze. He wanted to tell the truth, that the world promised nothing, that walls failed, that even the strongest hands could slip. But the vow had not yet been forged. I will return, he said. The boy nodded. Trust has no doubt when it is young. The guardian stood, turned, and walked into the night, armor settling across his shoulders like a second skin. Behind him, the city breathed. Ahead of him, history shifted its weight. Part 2. The day the horizon broke. The first sign was not sound. It was wrongness. The birds did not scatter. in panic. They rose together, silent and coordinated, abandoning the fields as if the earth itself had issued an order they alone could hear. The wind followed them, dragging dust across the grass, where morning dew should have clung. The horizon, so steady it had become invisible through familiarity, thickened, blurred, and began to move. The guardian saw it from the wall, and for the first time in his life, he felt time turn against him. The luxury of normal, below him, the city breathed in ignorance. A woman scolded a child for running too fast. A merchant laughed at a joke he would never finish telling. A guard scratched his beard and shifted his weight, already thinking of midday rest. The guardian's jaw tightened. He had spent his life preparing for this moment, and still it arrived wrapped in deception. Catastrophe did not announce itself. It waited until the city felt safest. The dust resolved into lines, too straight, too deliberate, an army moving with the confidence of men who had already counted the dead. He tasted iron in his mouth. The horn and the lie. It told. The horn's cry split the morning open. Sound tore through stone and flesh alike, ripping routine apart and replacing it with urgency. People froze, then surged. The city's heartbeat spiked, panic clawing at the edges of discipline. The guardian ran. Orders left his mouth without thought, honed by years of restraint. Close the gates. Archers, now. Pull the outer patrols back. Men obeyed because his voice carried something more reliable than volume. Certainty. They trusted him with their fear because he had never abused it. The horn promised order. It lied. The enemy's face. They came into full view before the gates sealed. No banners, no heralds, no ritual. Armor mismatched and scarred, shields darkened by old blood, faces carved into shapes that no longer recognized mercy as a concept. These men had not come to conquer. They had come to erase. Drums began, slow, heavy, patient, not a rally, a countdown. Each beat pressed into the chest like a fist, vibrating through bone and wall alike. The sound did not inspire courage. It crushed it. The guardian inhaled deeply. Hold, he told himself, not the wall, the city. When the wall became a slaughterhouse, the first wave hit like a collapsing structure. Arrows fell in sheets, blotting out light. Men screamed as they realized training did not prepare you for watching a friend die beside you. Shields shattered, spears lodged in flesh and refused to come free. The guardian moved constantly. He sealed gaps with bodies, sometimes enemy, sometimes his own men, dragged back just before collapse. He shoved wounded fighters aside, not gently, but with urgency. "This isn't death," he growled at one man trying to stand on a broken leg. "This is waste." He killed efficiently. No roars, no celebration, just work. Blood slicked the stones until footing became guesswork. Bronze rang against bronze until his arm went numb. The air thickened with smoke and screams, turning breath into effort. Time lost shape. Minutes stretched into eternities. Eternities collapsed into seconds. Still, they held. And still, the drums continued. The breach that changed everything. The breach was small. That was what made it deadly. A pocket where pressure concentrated, where bodies piled faster than men could be replaced. The Guardians saw it instantly. The way the enemy leaned into that point. The way fatigue showed in his own line. If that gap widened, the inner quarters would fall. He did not think. He moved. Leaping down from the wall, he slammed into the breach, with men at his back, becoming the hinge that stopped the door from flying open. Steel screamed, bone cracked, flesh tore. He felt pain and ignored it. They pushed. He pushed back. Men died inches from him, faces twisted into shapes he would remember long after their names faded. He dragged one man forward with his shield arm, using the body to block a spear meant for another. This was not heroism. This was triage with teeth. They sealed the breach. Barely. The sound that unmade him, it cut through the noise like a blade. A scream, high, sharp, inside the city. Not the sound of a man, not the sound of a soldier, a sound that did not belong on a battlefield. The Guardian froze for half a heartbeat. That was all it took. The line wavered. The enemy surged. He recovered instantly, too late to stop what had already happened. Fear did not flood him. Clarity did. I am too far away. The belief that distance equaled protection shattered in an instant. He had placed himself between danger and the city, yet danger had slipped past him, the way it always did when you guarded the wrong place. The choice that damned him, he turned. Men shouted his name. Someone grabbed his arm. "Hold," a captain screamed. "If you leave..." He tore free. Command meant nothing now. Doctrine meant nothing. He ran. Armor dragged at his limbs. Smoke burned his lungs. Streets he had memorized twisted under chaos. People fled past him, eyes wild, clutching whatever they could carry. He reached the inner quarters as flames chewed through rooftops. Doors lay splintered. Bodies lay where bodies should never be. He searched with a desperation that bordered on madness, calling out once, only once. There was no answer. When the city died in pieces, the city did not fall all at once. It died like a body hemorrhaging, slowly, unevenly, painfully. By nightfall, resistance collapsed. Survivors hid among ruins or fled into darkness. The enemy moved through the wreckage methodically, killing what moved, burning what did not. The Guardian searched until his legs buckled. He fell amid ash and blood, armor cracked, hands shaking. The world narrowed to a single truth that burned itself into his soul. I believed standing ahead was enough. I was wrong. The vow had not yet been spoken, but something inside him had already died. Part 3. The vow that outlived death. Death did not arrive as sleep. It arrived as release, violent at first, then absolute. The Guardian's body hit the stone hard enough to make the world flash white. For a moment, he felt everything at once. The ache of torn muscle, the wet heat of blood under bronze, the raw burn of smoke trapped in his lungs. Then sensation began to fall away in layers, as if his body were shedding itself. Sound went first. The battle's roar dulled into distance, like thunder heard through deep water. Screams softened. Metal lost its bite. Even pain, so sharp it had made him feel immortal, collapsed inward, retreating until it vanished entirely. And then he realized something impossible. He was still aware, not alive, not breathing, not moving, aware. His thoughts did not float. They did not blur. They sharpened with terrifying clarity. As his vision widened beyond the limits of flesh, he rose, not upward, not outward, but away, slipping loose from the gravity of his body like a cloak sliding off shoulders. Below him, the shell remained, his armor cracked and blackened, his mouth half open, as if still trying to form an order. His hand twitched once toward a shield that had already been separated from him. Then it stopped, permanently. The sight struck him harder than any blade. He tried to go back, not to live, Not to fight, just to stay long enough to see, to know if the inner gate held, to know if the enemy had been stopped, to know, above everything else, if his son had survived the fire and the screaming. But the pull had already begun. It was not forceful. It was inevitable. The space between breaths, darkness opened around him. Not empty darkness, not the darkness of a room. This darkness was vast and breathing, alive, with a rhythm too large to be called time. It folded in on itself like smoke caught in currents he could not see. There was no floor, no ceiling, no direction, yet he felt held, supported by something that did not need to explain itself. He floated there and felt the world below grow distant. His city became a shape, then a memory, then a point of pain he could no longer touch. And in that separation, grief finally reached him. Not the grief of losing a battle, the grief of losing presence. He had stood too far ahead. He had believed distance was protection. He had believed sacrifice was enough. He had been wrong. The truth did not accuse him. It simply existed. The first reckoning, images surfaced without warning. Not memories the way humans remember, but truths shown without mercy. The boy asleep, with fingers curled around his cloak, the quiet morning breath against his palm. The moment he knelt and promised, "I will return." The moment he turned away and walked into the night. The guardian's essence tightened, compressed, until he felt as if he might collapse into nothing. "I failed," he tried to say, but words did not exist here the way they did in life. Meaning existed without sound. Emotion existed without throat or lungs. Failure is information. The understanding entered him whole, not punishment, not condemnation, instruction. He had been strong, vigilant, brave, but he had not been there. He had made an ancient mistake, confusing standing forward with standing beside. And the cost of that mistake had written itself into his soul. The presence's light appeared as a line at first, thin, precise, cutting through the dark like a blade through cloth. It widened as he moved closer, and there they were. Presences, not bodies, not faces, not gods the way men imagine gods, old men with judgment in their eyes. These were forces, intelligences, witnesses. They did not speak because speech was unnecessary. Their awareness was a language of its own. He felt himself examined, not with cruelty, but with absolute clarity. They did not ask him what he wanted. They showed him what he had become. A guardian who believed protection was distance. A warrior who thought sacrifice excused absence. A father who promised return and did not deliver it. The truth hurt more than death. The threads of possibility. Then he saw time, not as a line, as a forest. Paths branched endlessly in every direction, some bright with victory, some dark with loss, some quiet with ordinary days that mattered more than triumphs. Each path contained a life. Each life contained a choice. And threaded through every one of those possibilities was the same lesson, waiting like a patient blade, presence, not performance, not dominance, presence. The guardian understood without being told. This was not about punishment. This was about completion. A vow was not something men made only with words. Sometimes it was something the soul agreed to, because it could not bear leaving the lesson unfinished. He did not beg. He did not bargain. He simply accepted what truth demanded of him. The vow is forged. He gathered himself, whatever self meant here, and directed his awareness into the only thing that still felt like him. His intent. I will return until I learn this. I will return until staying costs more than leaving. I will return until presence becomes my instinct, not my sacrifice. I will return until I can stand beside what I love without trying to outrun fear. The vow ignited, not as pain, as purpose. It wrapped around him like living fire, threading itself through whatever spiritual structure held him together. It anchored him, fastening him to a future where the lesson would not be optional. With the vow came knowing. The boy's soul was not destroyed, not erased, not lost, only displaced. Their threads would cross again, but time would test him first, again and again, until he became the kind of guardian who could stay. The fall forward, the light collapsed inward, the darkness folded, and suddenly he was falling again, this time not backward into death, but forward into life. Impact returned brutally. Air slammed into lungs that had never breathed before. Sound crashed in. Voices, crying, the chaotic rhythm of birth. Pain returned too, sharp and raw, as if existence itself was a wound. Hands lifted him. Unknown hands, warm, human. A voice murmured over him. He could not understand the words, but he understood the feeling beneath them. Welcome. He was small again, weak again. The vow pulsed inside him like a second heartbeat. He did not remember the city. He did not remember the gate, but he remembered something, a tension when left alone, a vigilance that woke him before danger arrived, a discomfort with distance that had no name, a need to watch, a need to stay. The thread holds. As the world closed around this new life, the vow settled into him like a hidden blade, not demanding, not urgent, patient, because time would come again, and when it did, the soul would be tested where it had once failed, not in battle, not in glory, but in the quiet, exhausting, terrifying, ordinary moments where staying mattered most. The vow had outlived death. Now it would outlive time. Part 4. The long walk through time. Time did not carry the vow gently. It carried it the way rivers carry stones, rolling it, grinding it, reshaping it without asking permission. Each life was not a chance at redemption. It was a refinement. A narrowing of error, a stripping away of excuses. The soul returned, again and again, unaware of its past, but never free of its weight. The vow remembered everything. The river town, dying unseen. He was born where water never stopped moving. The river was the town's lifeline, and its grave. It fed families and swallowed the unlucky without apology. From childhood, he watched it the way he once watched horizons, quietly, intently, waiting for danger to announce itself in small signs others ignored. He became the town's shadow guardian. He stood outside doors at night, walked widows home, interrupted arguments before fists closed. People slept easier knowing he was nearby, even if they rarely thanked him. He never left. That was the problem. He stayed so completely that he forgot how to belong. Women came and went. They said he was kind, reliable, distant. They said loving him felt like leaning against a wall, strong, unmoving, but cold. When joy arrived, he kept watch instead of participating. When laughter rose, he scanned for threats instead of smiling. Years passed. He grew old, standing in the same places. One winter night, The river flooded. People screamed. Boats overturned. The current pulled bodies under in seconds. He waded in without hesitation, dragging 3 people to safety before the cold stole strength from his legs. The 4th time, the river took him. He died clawing against water, lungs burning, unseen in the dark. By the time his body surfaced, the flood had passed. The town mourned briefly. They said, "He kept us safe." No one held his hand as he died. In the dark, beyond breath, the vow tightened. Staying must include being known. 2. The desert caravan. Dying moving, he returned beneath a sky that punished stillness. The desert was merciless. Sand flayed skin raw. Wind erased footprints. Survival demanded constant vigilance. He became a caravan guard, trusted with lives that depended on his awareness. He was brilliant at it. He read storms before clouds formed. He sensed ambush before dust shifted. He rerouted caravans against protests and saved them. But when journeys ended, he could not stop walking. He could not sit by fires without scanning the dark, could not sleep while others rested, could not accept comfort without fear it would dull his edge. One night, after weeks on the road, a woman reached for his hand. "You don't have to watch anymore," she whispered. He pulled away. Before dawn, he walked alone into the sand. Days later, dehydration hollowed him out. His legs failed. The sun pressed him flat against the earth. He died, still moving forward, dragging himself toward a horizon that never changed. No one found the body. The desert erased him completely. The vow burned hotter. Staying requires rest. 3. The Night Watch. Dying with authority, stone cities returned him to shadow. Here, danger hid behind laughter and doors. He wore a badge that gave him power, and for a time he wielded it with care. But exhaustion crept in. Fear hardened into anger. Anger tempted him to end problems instead of contain them. One night, a man reached too fast. The guardian struck first. The jaw shattered. The crowd cheered. Authority affirmed him. But alone afterward, he vomited in an alley, shaking, not from guilt, but from recognition. He had crossed a line he could not see from the outside. Years later, during a riot, someone he had once humiliated recognized him. A blade slid between his ribs in the crush of bodies. He died bleeding in a street he had sworn to protect, hearing people chant his name, not in gratitude, but in rage. The vow recorded the lesson. Staying must never become domination. 4. The plague years. Dying despised. This life was the cruelest. Disease moved invisibly, killing without honor. He enforced quarantines, turned families away, barred doors with shaking hands while children screamed inside. He stayed, not because he wanted to, because leaving would kill more. People spat on him, cursed him, called him monster. He absorbed their hatred like poison and did not defend himself. At night, he prayed, not for forgiveness, but for numbness. It never came. When sickness finally claimed him, it was slow. He died alone in a sealed room, listening to footsteps pass his door without stopping. The city survived because of him. The city forgot him. The vow softened slightly. Staying does not guarantee gratitude. V. The acceleration, dying tired. The world sped up. Steel replaced stone. Machines replaced horses. Violence arrived without warning and without armor. He returned again and again. Guard, soldier, officer, observer, each time closer to the same role. He stopped disasters before they happened. He aged carrying stress no one saw. In one life, a heart attack took him alone in a locker room. In another, exhaustion led to a fatal mistake. In another, he simply burned out and faded. Each death was quiet. Each death taught him the same thing. Protection without connection hollows the soul. 6. Returning in black skin, the last preparation. Then came this life. Black skin. America, history heavy on the shoulders. Here, vigilance was misread. Calm was suspect. Authority questioned before exercised. He learned to regulate himself constantly. Tone, posture, expression, because survival demanded it. He found his watchtowers again. Surveillance rooms, screens, camera grids like constellations. He noticed patterns, prevented harm, stayed invisible. But something was different. He no longer ran toward danger automatically. He paused. He stayed in rooms longer. He sat when standing felt easier. The vow was no longer sharpening him. It was slowing him down, preparing him. 7. The thread pulls home. Across lifetimes, he had died alone, moving, hated, exhausted. Now the vow whispered something new. This time, you will be tested by love, not by war, not by disaster, by a child, a soul returning through blood and timing, not memory, the same thread, different body. And this time, distance would not be allowed. The vow had one final demand left. Stay where it hurts to stay. Part 5. Returning in black skin and a new world. This life did not begin with fire. It began with containment. Concrete, steel, fluorescent lights that never softened. Doors that closed with a sound that meant final. The soul arrived here already familiar with watchfulness, but the environment sharpened it to a blade. Corrections was the first watchtower, a place where violence did not announce itself. It gathered quietly, learned routines, waited for moments of inattention. He learned to read it in posture, in pacing, in the way silence thickened before a storm. He learned fast, too fast, because hesitation in that place was not an inconvenience. It was a death sentence. The day that almost took him. The incident did not start loudly. It never does. One inmate moved too close. Another blocked the exit. A third's eyes kept shifting, counting, measuring. The soul recognized the pattern before the mind named it. Weapons flashed. Improvised blades. Cold intent. No warning. Time fractured. The first strike came fast. He fought instinctively, not heroically. Elbows, leverage, movement. He felt the air change as others closed in. He knew with a certainty that cut through panic that if he went down, he would not get back up. Death hovered close enough to smell. Two figures moved without hesitation, officers whose names are left unspoken here, not out of secrecy, but respect. They crashed into the moment with decisive violence, pulling attackers off him, dragging him clear as weapons clattered to the floor. Seconds later, the corridor was chaos. Minutes later, it was quiet. He stood there shaking, not from fear, but from recognition. This was how guardians died, when they stood too far forward. The vow stirred, not to warn, but to mark. You survived because others stayed with you. That lesson would not be forgotten. Leaving the cage, but not the watch, he left corrections with scars that did not show. The hypervigilance followed him. Casinos came next. Worlds built on illusion, temptation, and money. Places where people believed chaos was entertainment. He learned quickly that beneath the lights and noise, the The same patterns existed: escalation, deception, desperation. Security suited him. He prevented fights before fists closed, redirected energy before it boiled over, walked floors with a presence that said, "Not here," without ever raising his voice. Then came surveillance, rooms with no windows, screens instead of faces, human behavior reduced to movement, rhythm, deviation. This felt dangerously familiar. He excelled. He could see trouble forming minutes before anyone else sensed it. He noticed the subtle pause before a theft, the unnatural clustering before violence, the shift in posture that preceded disaster. He became indispensable. Promotions followed. Responsibility stacked higher. Decisions carried weight that could never be explained to people who didn't understand the job. And the old pattern crept back in quietly. Long hours, missed moments, always one more shift, one more incident, one more reason to stay late. Fatherhood arrives and changes nothing. At first, Jaden was born into that rhythm, a small, warm presence that should have changed everything. At first, it didn't. Not because love was absent, but because guardians are slow to recalibrate. He provided. He protected. He worked harder. He told himself he was doing it for his family. The irony was cruel. By the time Jaden was 5, the marriage had begun to fracture, not explosively, but through erosion. Conversations shortened, silences lengthened. Home felt like another environment requiring vigilance instead of rest. And with that fracture came the old fear. Loss. The kind that did not arrive as death, but as distance. The vow tightened, not to push him forward this time, but to hold him still. The choice he did not make. Opportunities came. Real ones. Lucrative positions in Chicago. Offers that promised advancement, recognition, status. Paths that would have looked impressive to anyone measuring success from the outside. In other lives, he would have taken them. Distance had always been his strategy, but something was different now. The fear was sharper because it was quieter. There was no battlefield to run toward, no enemy to confront, only the possibility of absence repeating itself. Then Jaden said it. They were together, nothing dramatic, just a moment folded into an ordinary day. "I don't want to go a day without seeing your face." The words landed like a blade through time. Not metaphorically, literally. They cut through centuries of instinct, through every lesson learned the hard way, through every life where distance had masqueraded as protection. The vow locked. Not with fire, with certainty. He turned down the jobs, every one of them. Not because they weren't tempting, but because staying had finally become more important than becoming. Modern pressure redefined work continued, but it changed. He rose in responsibility without leaving, advanced without abandoning proximity, became a director not by chasing titles, but by being undeniable where he stood. He trained others to notice without panicking, to intervene without humiliating, to understand that security was not about dominance, it was about stewardship. At home, he learned a harder skill: presence without distraction. He sat on the floor when a bed wasn't available. He stayed quiet when reassurance mattered more than answers. He left rooms when tension rose instead of asserting control. This was the work no resume ever recorded. The vow watched, and for the first time across lifetimes, it did not sharpen him. It rested. The fear releases one evening. Unremarkable by every external measure, the realization came. He was no longer afraid of losing Jaden. Not because loss was impossible, but because he was finally doing the only thing that mattered. He was staying, not ahead, not behind, beside. The vow, ancient and patient, loosened its grip. Completion was no longer a question of if, only when. Part 6. The Son Who Came Back. The vow recognized him before the mind did. Not by name, not by face, by weight. The familiar gravity returned the first time Jaden leaned into him without asking. When that small body rested against his side as if it had always belonged there. No testing, no hesitation, just trust, offered freely and without condition. The vow did not flare. It exhaled. The thread had come home. Trust that did not ask to be proven. Jaden carried no memory of other lives. He carried something older. Children do not analyze safety. They feel it in their bones. They know when someone will remain before that person ever understands why staying matters. Jaden never asked if his father would be there tomorrow. He assumed it. That assumption was heavier than any responsibility the guardian had ever carried, because he knew, across centuries, that trust like this could only be broken once. A life that finally slowed. The work still mattered. It always would. But the shape of it changed. Leaving the casino was not a retreat. It was a recalibration. The lights, the noise, the constant adrenaline had sharpened him for years, but they had also kept him tethered to nights that stole mornings. When he became security operations manager with the state, the watchtower shifted again. Government buildings, public spaces, infrastructure meant to serve everyone. Here, security was quieter, but no less serious. He collaborated with law enforcement, assisted investigations, ranging from property damage to homicide, helped reconstruct events through footage, timelines, movement patterns. His vigilance still mattered, but it no longer demanded his absence. This work carried purpose without consuming proximity, and that changed everything. Time given back, time returned in pieces. Mornings, evenings, unrushed drives, Jaden noticed immediately, not with celebration, but with ease. They sat in the truck with the engine off, doors open, the world moving around them while they stayed still. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't. Both were equally meaningful. He learned when to answer, and when silence was the answer. He learned that presence did not need explanation, just consistency. The vow watched closely. This was new. Ancestral hands at work. There were moments, quiet ones, when he felt it clearly. A sense of guidance that did not come from thought, as if the same forces that had pressed him forward through war and time were now pressing him gently back, slowing him, anchoring him, whispering the same truth from different mouths across generations. You are where you are meant to be. He did not question it. Some knowledge arrives without needing proof. This change, this job, this timing, this closeness felt assisted, not earned through ambition, but aligned through ancestry, as if the long walk through time had narrowed to this exact position beside his son. So Jaden would know. So Jaden would feel it. He stayed. The work that mattered most, at home, the real work, unfolded quietly, reading together, sitting on the floor because the floor felt safe, leaving rooms when tension crept in, not out of weakness, but wisdom. He did not speak poorly of anyone. He did not burden a child with adult conflict. He did not turn pain into explanation. He modeled something harder than heroism: regulation. When emotions surged, he grounded. When fear whispered, he stayed still. When old instincts reached for control, he chose accompaniment instead. Jaden learned from this without instruction. Children always do. A different measure of success. There were moments, passing ones, when ambition tried to reassert itself. Other paths, other cities, other titles, they no longer tempted him. Because he had already heard the truest metric of success spoken in a child's voice. I don't want to go a day without seeing your face. Nothing eclipsed that. Not prestige, not money, not legacy as the world defined it. The vow did not need to intervene. The choice had already been made. When the fear finally left one evening, as daylight softened and the house settled into quiet, the realization arrived without ceremony. He was no longer afraid, not of loss, not of repetition, not of failure, because he was doing the only thing that had ever mattered. He was staying where it hurt to stay, where it required patience instead of valor, consistency instead of sacrifice, love instead of distance. The vow loosened, not suddenly, but completely. Its work was almost done. Part 7. Completion of the vow. Completion did not arrive with thunder. There was no voice from the sky, no vision of fire or light, no final reckoning that demanded kneeling. Completion arrived the way truth usually does, quietly, without announcement, in the space between one breath and the next. The morning nothing happened. It was an ordinary morning. Sunlight fell across the kitchen counter at a low angle, catching dust in the air. The house was quiet, in the way homes become quiet when nothing is wrong. No tension humming beneath the surface. No unresolved arguments waiting to erupt. Jaden was still asleep. The guardian stood still long enough to notice something unfamiliar. His body was not braced. His shoulders were not tight. His jaw was not clenched. His mind was not scanning 5 steps ahead. For the first time in memory, longer than this life, longer than names, he was simply present. And in that presence, something ancient loosened. When the vow released, the vow did not shatter. It dissolved. Not into nothing, but into understanding. For lifetimes, it had lived inside him as tension, as vigilance sharpened into identity, as readiness that never slept. It had driven him to walls, deserts, corridors, screens, anywhere danger might emerge. It had taught him to stand, to endure, to protect, but it had never taught him how to rest. Now it did. The vow recognized its own completion, not because the world was safe, but because he no longer believed safety required distance. He had learned the final lesson. Presence is not proximity. Presence is availability, and availability is a choice renewed daily. The past, revisited without pain, images rose, not as wounds, but as memories finally free of charge. The city wall at dawn, the breach, the scream that broke him, the river, the desert, the plague doors, the nights alone in control rooms lit by screens. They passed through him without resistance. Nothing demanded correction anymore. What had once felt like failure revealed itself as instruction. What had haunted him across centuries softened into coherence. He had not been punished. He had been prepared. How the world responded. Completion does not go unnoticed. Not by fanfare, but by alignment. Conflicts lost their grip. Situations resolved without escalation. People calmed in his presence without knowing why. Children gravitated toward him. Colleagues trusted his judgment instinctively. Law enforcement listened, not because he demanded authority, but because he carried it quietly. He had become something rare, a protector who no longer needed war, a leader who did not need dominance, a father who did not need fear to stay. Staying without cost. The old calculus no longer applied. Staying no longer felt like sacrifice. It felt like truth. He did not count what he gave up. He did not wonder what might have been. He did not resent paths not taken, because the path he was on finally matched the shape of his soul. This was not resignation. It was arrival. What completion left behind? When the vow released, it left space. Not emptiness. Possibility. Relationships no longer arrived to test him. They arrived to meet him. Love no longer felt like a battlefield to secure. It felt like something that grew when tended gently. Silence no longer signaled danger. It signaled peace. For the first time across time, he did not feel the need to watch the horizon. He was already home, a legacy without weight. Jaden absorbed this without instruction. Children always do. He learned that strength can be calm, that authority can be kind, that a man can stay without losing himself. The vow did not end with the guardian. It ended through him. That is how cycles close, not by erasing the past, but by refusing to pass its wounds forward. The last watch, the guardian still stood watch. But now he watched differently, not for threats, but for growth, not for loss, but for continuity, not for departure, but for presence. The vow that had outlived death had fulfilled its purpose. It did not demand another return. It did not bind him to another lesson. It rested. And in that rest, the soul finally did too. Awake, present, and unafraid. Part V8. Legacy. This part was never meant to be loud. It was never meant to prove anything, explain everything, or convince anyone who had not lived it. It exists for a single reason: to remain. A letter that was never written, but always lived. If this were a letter, it would not begin with apology. It would begin with truth. Jaden, before you ever knew my name, before you understood how the world can lean hard on a man and ask him to bend, I was already choosing you. Not because I was perfect, not because I always knew the right thing to do, but because I learned, slowly, painfully, across a lifetime that carried many others inside it, that staying matters more than winning. There was a time when I believed protection meant distance. I thought strength was measured by how far ahead I could stand, how much danger I could absorb alone. I believed if I ran far enough forward, nothing would ever reach what I loved. I was wrong. What protects a child is not how far a father can go. It's how deeply he remains. The man you saw and the man you never had to see. You saw consistency before you saw strength. You saw me choose calm when anger would have been easier. You saw me leave rooms instead of escalating them. You saw me show up on ordinary days when nothing impressive was happening. What you didn't see was the work behind those choices, the instinct to control when fear rose, the urge to dominate uncertainty instead of sitting with it, the old voice that said, "Move ahead," instead of "stay beside." I fought that voice quietly, every day, not because I was weak, but because I had already learned what happens when a man leaves even once. I promised myself I would not make you learn that lesson. Why this story ends with peace. People think strength is proven in crisis. They are wrong. Strength is proven in consistency, in waking up when no one is watching, in choosing patience when anger feels justified, in staying present when walking away would be easier. That is how cycles end, not with dominance, not with revenge, but with integration. You did not come into my life to be saved. You came into my life to remind me what staying looks like when it is finally done right. What you carry forward, without burden. This story is not a weight you have to carry. It is a foundation you get to stand on. You do not owe the past anything. You do not have to be a guardian, a protector, or a warrior unless you choose to be. What you inherit is simpler and stronger. You come from presence. You come from restraint. You come from a man who learned to stay. That means you get to build instead of repair, to love without fear of abandonment, to lead without needing control. You get to walk forward without scanning the horizon for loss. The final truth: once, long ago, a man stood on a wall scanning the darkness, believing his value was measured by how much danger he could face alone. Now, that same soul walks beside his son, unafraid of the quiet. That is not the end of the story. That is the victory. Because the bravest thing a man can do is not die for something. It is to live for it and stay. Epilogue. For those who read this, if you have read this far, understand this. This is not a story about reincarnation. It is a story about choice. It is for the fathers who carry the weight of demanding work, past, present, and future, who stand watch in prisons, on streets, behind screens, in offices, on night shifts, and in quiet places no one ever applauds. For the men who come home tired, carrying stress they do not speak aloud, trying to be strong without becoming absent. It is for the fathers who know they are not perfect. None of us are. But who show up anyway. This is a story about a man who decided not to pass pain forward. About a father who chose presence over pride. About learning that being there, fully, imperfectly, consistently, can end cycles that strength alone never could. We teach our sons what it means to be men, not by what we say in moments of confidence, but by how we stay when things are hard, by how we regulate ourselves when fear rises, by how we choose patience when anger feels justified, by how we stand with them, not ahead of them, not above them. Time is not promised, not from one moment to the next, not from one breath to the next. That is why presence matters more than legacy, and consistency matters more than perfection. Because if lessons are not learned, they are repeated. If cycles are not ended, they are inherited. If presence is postponed, it becomes absence. This story exists as a reminder. You do not have to be flawless to change the future. You do not have to win every battle to protect what matters. You only have to stay. The guardian is no longer waiting for the next fight. He is no longer standing alone on a wall. He is home. And for every father reading this, still fighting, still learning, still trying, that is enough. Warrior's heart, relentless soul.